Hey y'all, this is Tom Maxwell, producer and editor of the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. I wanted to start with an editor's note for a couple of reasons. One, you'll hear a drop in audio quality, ironically, when I'm discussing my music background, as I had to use the Zoom recorded audio for that section. And two, I realized after recording that I neglected to define libertarian socialism, which seems like a big oversight as I identify as a libertarian socialist or an anarchist, and in this episode we discuss the importance of definitions. I define libertarian socialism as a political and economic system intended to maximize human freedom by overcoming the domination, repression, and alienation that block the free flow of human creativity, thought, and action through the administration of all by all. I believe that Bitcoin can and will play a key role in the transition to and development of that system. Thank you all for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this special episode of the Progressive Bitcoiner.
Welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast, where we explore the intersection of Bitcoin and progressive issues. I'm your host, Mark Stefani. Tom Maxwell, welcome to your own podcast, the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. Welcome. This is a little bit different format here. We had to reschedule a few things, and I thought, who can I get on the podcast in a last minute situation? And I thought, why not my own audio guy? You have a lot of great insight on Bitcoin and life in general, and it seemed like the perfect situation to do so. And I'm actually quite honored to have this time with you chatting about Bitcoin, because we haven't done it before to this extent. And so I'm excited to see where our conversation goes. We've sent each other a few questions in advance to get the content off and running, but I'm excited to know where things head.
Yeah, for sure. No, this is a lot of fun, and I'm glad to actually kind of get my voice out there for kind of helping other people get their voices out there for some time here. So it's kind of exciting to be able to kind of give to talk to everybody out and listening to the podcast. Thank you all so much for listening up to this point and for engaging with us. And to me, this is a really important project to me, because I think it's while we're starting to see sort of a rising of progressive voices in the space, I feel like that's just it's really different than it was a year ago, and to kind of start this process and this project, and to try to kind of pull those people out from their shell and all of that. I think we've done some of that. I've seen the engagement on Twitter, and I've seen the way people talk about the podcast, and I'm really honored and glad to have people enjoy it so much, and so thank you all for listening, and thank you, Mark, for wanting to start this awesome ride and this really important project, and I'm just so glad we're doing it. So happy to be here talking about Bitcoin and life and everything.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Tom. Admittedly, I feel like I'm in the point of the podcast. We started in December, but I'm feeling a little down about it. Maybe it's a bear market speak, but in the rationale is, I think, in part being pulled in other directions in my life, in part because you're hoping for even more engagement than what you're already getting, in part because, like other forms of content in this space, oftentimes you don't get that affirmation that you need to keep going. But then when you do get it, it certainly makes you feel a hell of a lot better. It makes you feel like you're doing the right thing. It makes you feel like you're committed to a project that's making a difference in people's lives. And I just have to remind myself of that, it's not about the affirmation. Ultimately, it's not about any potential sponsorships. It's about putting out content that people care about and for a cause that we believe in. And even if that means that we can't do as many episodes as we hope for, I think it'll still be worth it. And so Echoing Tom, thank you so much for everybody for listening and sharing our episodes, offering suggestions, offering feedback, leaving reviews. It means a great deal to us. This was started on a whim, and we're incredibly proud that we're still at the stage that we are right now. So thanks again.
Yeah, if I could just jump in and add a little bit to that. I think, part of why I think it's important is not just the instant engagement, but that, like, when somebody, I feel like, every day is a new opportunity, or somebody might come in and discover Bitcoin tomorrow, right? Tomorrow might be the day when they are like, what is this all about? I've been, I hear it's this sort of right wing sort of thing. I don't really like to be associated with that type of thing, but but I started to see some people maybe talk about it in this way, or maybe it's not as bad as I've heard it is, and then they find 34 episodes of this podcast, right? And they can go, "Oh my gosh, yes, I can binge this and listen to all these episodes all in a row." Because I do that with stuff all the time where I'm like, I discover something and I'm like, "There's 100 episodes. This is amazing." And so I think that is, it's really good to have that just available for people as, sort of to help them on their journey when they're starting and all of that. So I think it's, super important that we've, no matter what happens going forward, honestly, like I'm not, in the best possible way, like the fact that we've done it and have that available for people, I think is super important. And I'm really glad it's out there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, a little bit of background on the two of us. We have some, before we get to Bitcoin, we wanted to ask each other a few questions out of curiosity about each other. And we all know, those of us who follow Tom on social media, on Twitter, that he's an incredibly talented musician in addition to audio engineer, both in his vocals and his guitar, and I'm sure other instruments. Uh, and I'm always curious when somebody has as strong as of a passion, let alone talent for something, what drives them and what that talent and passion means to that individual, how it shapes their lives, how it allows you, Tom, to relate to the world. So if you could tell us about how music does that for you, we'd be grateful.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, first thing is I started playing guitar when I was 13 years old and I'm 32 now. So I've been playing for the majority of my life. And it's been, it's only been the last couple of years where it hasn't been like my total identity, music really. I mean, as soon as when I was 13 years old, I discovered Led Zeppelin and wanted to be Jimmy Page. And that kind of got me going on my guitar, journey. And where it kind of led me is how I kind of get into a bunch of different stuff I've gotten into, which is I learn about something that seems interesting, and then I wonder, like, what's the background of this? How did it get to this point? Right. And so who was Led Zeppelin listening to? And they listened to the blues genre. And when I got into the blues genre, I had found it. I had figured out what I was going to do with my whole life. And
Was there a particular artist?
yeah, I mean, the artist really that like grabbed me the most of everybody was Stevie Ray Vaughan.
I just recently introduced my daughter to Stevie Ray Vaughan and playing the Slight Return song for her.
Yeah.
And she calls it the monkey song because the beginning when he's doing I'm not going to even attempt to recreate it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the wah wah pedal.
Yeah. To her, it sounds like a monkey howling.
Sure.
And so we're jamming Slight Return or Voodoo Child Slight Return
Yeah.
on the way to school. I love it. I was
Nice.
super proud.
I remember where I was. I remember I was coming home from school actually, and my mom had just gotten XM radio in the car, and they had the Bluesville station, and we had put on, I was like, let's put on Bluesville, and she was like, okay, great. And I remember there's like my parents still live where they've lived for the last like 20 years now. And we're coming around this corner and the song Pride and Joy came on. And I was like, what is this? Right? Like, this is awesome. And so that really kind of put me on the Stevie Ray Vaughan path. And I I just really appreciate like his intensity, and also how he uh Eric Clapton as an example today, especially, like he's been like this for his whole life, but he's just sort of a racist, right? He's just not that really great of a guy in the end, which is really unfortunate. um and he was part of that kind of contingent of people, like Led Zeppelin is included in that, who just openly like took things from the blues community, right? Like they took songs, they took stuff, and they just didn't credit them. Steve Ray Vaughan, he was always somebody, the first person to say like, I didn't write this, it was this guy, these people are the best, you need to listen to them, like you think my version's good, wait till you hear the original. And Buddy Guy has who's a blues guitarist. He has a kind of a famous anecdote where he's like, he had heard about C. Ray Vaughan. He was like, okay, another white guy playing blues. And then he went out to his mailbox and he had a check from BMI or ASCAP or whatever, because Stevie Ray Vaughan had cut Buddy Guy's songs, and that record came out and they sold really well. He was like, I love this guy, right? He credited me, and now I get to do well also. So he was really embraced by the kind of old school blues community. Um, and so that led me to go out and start doing the local blues jams around here. There's a couple places that hosted like weekly blues jams, and I would get up and play my 3 songs with, but the way it works is you walk in, there's a list of people, you write your name down, you write what instrument you play, if you sing or not, and then the person who runs the jam puts a band together, and then whoever's singing gets to choose the songs, right? And they say, we're doing a shuffle in the key of A, and it does this, and then we count it off when we go, and then everybody gets to take a solo and all that. um, and so I got to know the guy who ran the jams, and he wanted to hire me to kind of do like regular gigs. So I did bar gigs with him, and other people in the area for about 5 years. That was my full-time job. And then as during that time, I got really into writing and trying to understand music production, and that led me to record I recorded an album. I wrote and recorded a full-length album that nobody really needs to go and listen to. Um, it's they say if you don't cringe at what you did a few years ago, then like you're not you know progressing fast enough, and so I'm progressing plenty fast. Um, but no, it was a good experience, and but it really was like, okay, I need to go somewhere where I can write songs, and I don't really, performing is fun and I really enjoy it, but I don't need to be a performer. I'd rather be a writer. And so I moved to Nashville in 2015. Let me pause for a second and just say background. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, which is actually where I am right now. So Nashville is about a 10-hour drive southwest of here. So I moved to Nashville in 2015, and I started writing songs, and I drove Uber, and I coached some swim lessons. I grew up as a swimmer. So I kind of, did some odd jobs, um, and while I was trying to write during the day and or write at night and go out and hang out with people at night and make connections and all that. Um, and I got to work with some great friends, and we got to make records, and so I got to do exactly what I came down there to do. And then I was offered some of those friends had a mutual connection, and she was looking for a new guitarist for her band, and they were like, Tom can play guitar. And so I got a call, and I didn't really want to be a touring musician. I'd never been a dream of mine, but it was an opportunity to kind of do, take first off, get to know people at a slightly higher level up in the kind of world, and also have maybe some good experiences. So accepted the gig, and I tried out, and I got the gig, and I played with Maggie Rose is the artist. She was like fully into like modern country at the time. At this point, she's kind of migrated more towards like Americana, rock and soul, sort of like funky kind of stuff. But I played with Maggie for 3 years, and I got to play all over the world. I've been to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I've been to the Middle East. I've been to the Caribbean, Europe. Um, we've opened for Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, Kelly Clarkson. We did a bunch of dates with Martina McBride, who's the sweetest person. And so I got to like experience a lot of cool stuff and play on some really big stages. Yeah, it was a fantastic experience, and I wouldn't change anything about it.
I'm going to interrupt you, Tom.
Yeah, please.
Traveling the world, to the extent that you did, obviously in the manner that you did, is limiting to some extent. But what did you take away from that? In hindsight, reflecting on that experience, not necessarily from a musical sense, but um, what did you learn from it, from a worldview, or personal?
Yeah, I mean, from a personal, kind of side, I got to kind of see a lot of different places and kind of get some, I had never left the United States before I started playing with Maggie. And, the best way to put it is like we basically traveled in like the not cushy way, but like sort of, like we got to kind of see that more of that side of things. So I always wanted to go and see like the actual places as they were, but we didn't really have a chance to do that most of the time. A lot of places, like I feel kind of bad because, I've been to a lot of places, but I've driven through most places. Really, we drove in, we went to the venue, we set up, we checked, we maybe walked down the street and got something to eat, or there was food at the venue for us. We played, we loaded out, and then we drove away. So occasionally we'd have a day off in a place or something like that. And I always wanted to kind of see, what it was really like to live in those places. But the main thing is that like there's obviously really unique architecture in places and all of that. But one of my main takeaway was that like we are all like have much more in common than we do have differences. Um, so I always tried to like figure out what the differences were, and there, it also kind of like sort of flies by. We're only there for like a short period of time. I mean, we went to the Middle East. We didn't. We landed at the airport, which was unbelievable airport. Doha Airport is crazy. Um, we drove right to the base. We were at the base for like 30 hours, 36 hours tops, and then we went back to the airport and we left.
Wow.
So there's like not, we didn't get to go around and see other bunch of stuff or like really experience any of that. Like I just kind of interacted with the soldiers mostly, it's central command for the Air Force in the Middle East. So also fun anecdote for everybody listening. When we took the stage at Al-Udeid Air Force Base, it was 124 degrees, was outside. And I made it to the very end of the show. And on the last song, 15, 30 seconds left in the song, I turned around, I walked to the back of the stage, and I threw up on the stage. I didn't want the service members to see me throw up, so I tried to get away from them. But there's great pictures of like just Maggie and our manager, Austin, who's also a drummer. So he was playing drums with us. And they're like taking a bow at the end of the show, and then I'm facing the other direction, like leaned over. So fun experiences. But yeah, it's we have a lot more in common than we have different.
How does music shape how you see the world? Has it shifted, do you think, through the lens of music and composition?
I guess the best thing, I mean, the thing that's taught me the most, I guess, more than anything in terms of composition wise, is that if you hear a jingle in a commercial, like Nationwide is on your side, like you hear that once, maybe twice, like you're never going to forget it. Right. It's just like so well done. And that's what pop music really is at its core. Right. It's just like so well done. What these people have done is use the exact right number of notes and the exact right words in the right order in this small span of time to grab people and then have them never forget what happened. It's, fantastic to have a 15-minute movement, in a symphony. But at the core of that is this little 4-note hook that gets you, right? That they keep coming back to and referencing so that it pulls you back in and resets you on the music. So, like the act of, having concise information repeated in a specific, allotment of time is an extremely effective way to get people to latch onto something.
Interesting. I like that. That's a really incredible history with your travels and everything. That's remarkable.
Yeah, it's cool. I got to do a lot of stuff, and so walking away from music at the end of 2019, for all of 2019, I was like, fascism is happening in America right now, and I'm not doing anything about it.
Right.
And climate change is destroying habitable life on Earth, and I'm not doing anything about it at all. I don't have any expertise in it. I don't have anything really maybe to add to the conversation, but like everybody should be working on this, in my opinion. So I should be working on it. And I just felt like, it was unfair to me and to the band to sort of like have my, halfway in, halfway out sort of mentality. And so I wanted to leave and do something different. And that's what I did. So I went and I ultimately got a job. I wanted to work in progressive politics, and I got a job with the Mike Bloomberg campaign for president. Not super progressive, really, in the end, but I'm grateful for the experience, and it definitely taught me, like, one thing that taught me was super important is it doesn't matter how much money you give me. If I don't really believe in what's going on, I can't really do it. So it's good to know.
Right. Integrity.
Hopefully.
Well, is it my turn?
Yeah, it's your turn. Yeah, so I had a few, questions I wanted to ask you, and the first one is, how has your medical practice shaped your overall worldview? You're a doctor, and you obviously, you know, you have all kinds of experiences that probably vary greatly, and there's a great range in what people kind of, you don't know what's coming necessarily, and when you show up to work, and how has that kind of shaped your overall worldview in terms of people and the way you interact with society?
I'm faced with death nearly every day at work. I'm a hospital medicine physician, which means I only work in the hospital. So it's the one that I work at is higher acuity. And so we see a lot of trauma and acute illnesses that crosses the spectrum of type of pathology. But, I'm in my 10th year of my career now, and like I said, I see people in the dying process who are, days, weeks, or dying in front of me nearly every day of the weeks that I work. And so that cumulative effect over time has most certainly changed my worldview as well as how I handle my day-to-day life and my own outlook on life. There are these commonalities that I've come to discern through this whole experience. Commonalities in that stage of life, in that dying process. Wow, we really went from like jovial fun, rock and roll to macabre death.
It's all part of life. So,
yeah, exactly. So I apologize if I'm bringing everybody down. But that's what I see. That's what I deal with. And, but I see these commonalities, and I see the commonalities twofold. One that has always fascinated me is that there's this homogeneity in death, in the physicality of it. All the physical identifiers that vary amongst our appearances, looking at you right now, a portion of those fade away. And in death, there's these common features that are obviously all anatomically justified. But to me, it was something special, that what differentiates us in life is somehow brought back together in death, in this common feature, this human commonality. And it's in the eyes, it's in the face, it's in the sunken cheeks, the expression or the absence thereof in our eyes when we're dead. But it's comforting to me. It has become comforting to me as I have recognized that commonality. But in addition, in that process and in the days and weeks that somebody is expecting to die or knowing that they're going to die, there are certain things that are focused on. And in my experience, that's been dignity, relief of suffering, and connection to loved ones. The first two, dignity and relief of suffering, are in large part what I'm responsible for as a physician, to make sure that the dying process is as dignified a process as it can be. And for each person, that's different. For many people, that's not being hooked up to machines, IVs, monitors, things like that, or it's being at home, or certain things with bathing or changing, things like that. Relief of suffering is obviously intuitive. People don't want to be in pain, and that is both expressed by family and by the loved ones. And it's almost every time that the family says, I do not want mom, I do not want dad to be in pain during this process. And I try to reassure them as much as I can that that's my job in all of this, is try to relieve suffering. And then it's connection to loved ones, right? And again, that's a very intuitive and simple thing that we want at that time in our lives. But what happens is those ridiculous arguments or hang-ups, the pride that you carried in your life towards that loved one or vice versa, almost inevitably melts away. And you recognize the inevitability of what's about to happen to your loved one, and there's almost an immediate reconciliation. And you can always tell the family member who has suffered the most in that sense. It's always the son or daughter from California. It's always the son or daughter from California flying in to try to save mom or dad at the last minute because they have to assuage their guilt. Not kidding. It happens more often than you would expect. And all the other siblings are saying, it's time for mom, dad to go. But then this other sibling says no. Inevitably, there's a backstory with fights, complications throughout life. And so what I'm trying to tell you is to get your shit together now and recognize that fight is not worth it. This isn't about forgiveness. This is not about necessarily anything going beyond what asking of you than just to move on and to, if you care about the relief of suffering and dignity of your loved one in that moment, setting aside that disagreement, that story is a means by which you can allow for those things, to have your loved one be more dignified, suffer less, because obviously there's that emotional component, because that dying person obviously is living that backstory as well. How have those elements changed my worldview? I constantly think about how do we optimize systems for dignity, relief of suffering, and optimizing our connections to loved ones. I don't have, obviously, an answer to that, but when we're bickering on Twitter about this, that, or the other ism, I always come back to those questions. I'm like, what is it about libertarian socialism or conservatism, communism, etc., that you believe will allow for those characteristics, in my opinion, that are some of the most, if not the most important things that are in our lives? How does it optimize for those? Again, that's an open-ended question, but that's I feel like it's that base layer, that foundation of, I guess, in essence, Maslow's hierarchy, that we need to allow for in order to optimize those things. just, I guess, thinking off the top of my head right now, like those aren't foundational in Maslow's hierarchy. You need the other ones first: food, shelter, etc. And I think that's where Bitcoin comes in, is because that foundation is very much an economic one. In how can we expect people to have those things that they deserve, that they need in the end of life, when they're still trying to piece together those foundational layers? So that's what shapes my worldview, and it's very much in the clouds. Maybe it's too idealistic, I don't know, but it's one of those things that that frames everything I think about. It certainly has lent itself to both an urgency to plan for the future, as well as a resetting of my own needs and expectations with regard to life, like the seeking out of the more the material elements of life, in addition to um, working harder to not only do those things at work, but carry it outside of work, um, to help people who are suffering, and just very, very simple things. I think back, 20 odd years ago, Oprah's random acts of kindness. I never forgotten about that. To me, it speaks volumes. And God, the other day, driving in traffic, and some guy lets me in, right?
Yeah.
I'm just like, you're an amazing human, man. Thank you so much. I don't know if that speaks to, again, my worldview or where we are in history, but I was just like, little things like that. Just like, thank you, thank you. That means such a great deal, and so you try to pay that forward. So, Tom, that's how the medical practice has shaped my overall
Yeah.
worldview. I hope it's for the better.
I love that. I mean, it's, it must be so difficult to have to, see people sort of at what must be their lowest point, a lot of the time. But, taking from that, that's, I think is, really comes down to like what, do no harm, right? And by, trying to alleviate suffering and help people kind of, help people, help shepherd people kind of through that. I think that's, that is absolutely a fantastic way to look at life in general. I think that's, I really agree with that for sure. I think, there are all kinds of ways that, as, whatever society means to each person is probably a little bit different. But if society is just the sum of all human interactions, then, the ways that society could do a lot more to help alleviate suffering and spread kindness, and like it would just be, and then those things, to me is an exponential thing, right? Where like if that's the way that people are, then if that's the incentives are to be kind, to alleviate suffering, to increase dignity in life everywhere we go, then it would build upon itself, and it would be a total transformation of the way that we interact with one another.
Yes, you touched on something there that it will dovetail well for my next question to you. But what it gets at is we can better identify what dignity or its absence is, in addition to what suffering is, much better than we can define the more positive elements of life, such as freedom.
Sure.
My next question coming up for you is going to relate to that. What one person's freedom is may not be the other person's sentiment. What I'm willing to give up in freedom is perfectly fine by me, but it may not be for you. Much harder to define than it is. I see you're in pain. That is quite easily identifiable, and much, I think, easier than to manage to treat than some of these more positive attributes. So,
Yeah.
my next question for you, Tom, comes from a tweet that I put out today that comes from itself, a recent clip from the What Bitcoin Did podcast with Peter McCormack interviewing Robert Breedlove and talking about freedom and taxation and slavery. And Robert Breedlove equated taxation to slavery. My tweet was, if taxes are slavery and only taking to Twitter and podcasts are your reaction to enslavement, perhaps it's worth questioning what you believe slavery to be, or at the very least, what you're willing to do to fight against it. Now apply that to Bitcoin. You should be mining your values already, but are you willing to protest, to march, to not be anonymous, write letters to reps, quit your fiat job, spend your sats to fight for Bitcoin? My question to you, Tom, what would you be willing to give up to ensure that Bitcoin, the protocol, survives? What freedoms would you value now that you would be willing to give up in order for Bitcoin to survive?
Yeah, so let me that's a excellent question, and I watched that clip as well, and I have some thoughts about that specifically, but let me start by saying this is that like I know and I think about it just constantly, and I have plans to, and I don't do nearly enough to actually like live my values. And so in the last year or so, especially last year and a half, I probably the best way to describe it is I went from being sort of on the left to being like way, 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 way on the left. The reason I phrase it that way is because there's a thing in anarchism called means ends alignment, and means ends alignment is if the end goal is A, I should do everything that is going to get me to A that is in line with what A represents. If my goal is to have a totally decentralized, bottom up society where people have free association and work together, I can't impose that from the top down. That is not means ends aligned. So it has to be this way where we build it up, right? And so in terms of like what would I give up, or what would I be willing to do to support Bitcoin adoption, or to kind of rally on under the banner of Bitcoin. Like I said, I should be doing a lot more, but what I'd like to do is sort of what we're doing now to a certain extent, which is getting the information out there from people who have a similar worldview and see the world in the, to your point, just you made it just a few minutes ago, in a way that what we should be doing as society or as people is trying to increase the dignity of life for as many people as possible, and not just for a handful of people or just for me. Because saying, I want poverty to go away, I want, a quality of life to be accessible to everybody, but the way I'm going to do that is to just focus on me alone and get there. I don't think that's a means ends alignment, in my opinion. So I think you have to go out and you have to bring that to people and educate them on what's going on, encourage them to take a similar view, and say, the more people we engage, the more people we bring in and try to work with as in cooperation, not just in a way that we're going to compete and whoever wins is the winner, then I think we'll get to a better position as a society as a whole, or as people, as humans. And so, I think there's, a lot of stuff that I think Bitcoiners as a group really agree on. I think one of the main things that Bitcoiners really agree on, like vast majority of Bitcoiners, is that we consume too much as people, as kind of a rule. Our consumerist society is not good for a number of reasons. There may be, maybe some people over here think it's, on the left are more like it's destroying the environment, and, the ecological viewpoint is all wrong. On the right, it's that like you're making choices that are actually like lowering your quality of life, when if we lived a simpler life and actually just kind of, didn't spend all of our money instantly, then we'd actually have a lot higher quality of life across the board. I think those things are both true. And I think they actually go hand in hand, right? They go together. If you didn't spend as much, then you wouldn't need to produce as much. And therefore we would have a more ecological, positive sort of, approach to the way we interact with the planet. And if that, means that we're not spending our money frivolously, then that's all good, right? Those things go together. So again, there's like so much we have in common. I really think that like when it comes down to it, probably like 90% of people have a lot in common and probably have very similar kind of goals, that if they were to align their goals together, we could accomplish so much. I think we're driven apart by all kinds of wedge issues that are, it's like these people are not good, or like, you know, these people are causing the problem. Well, they're just living their lives. If you mean that like a small number of people are causing a problem, that's true. It's like the cantillionaire class, right? That writes all the laws, and they change them kind of as they want to for their own benefit. We're not directly intimately involved in the democratic process in the same way that we could be if we reorganized the way that we do things. I think that's something that ultimately a lot of people probably feel that they don't have a lot of power, and they wish they had more power over their own life. And I think that they should have that. So, I think there's a lot more we could be doing. I don't know at this point. I've kind of come to like I said, I've kind of moved, to the left. And when the conclusion I've come to is that just protests, going and marching in the streets, just saying we're here to just march and then we're going to leave. It's not really going to accomplish anything in the end. It just isn't. It feels good in the moment, but ultimately, I'm just going to say the capitalist class, right? Because that's how I kind of think of it. They let you do that and they have no problem with it. If they have no problem with it whatsoever, really, it's not going to do anything.
Right. Right. It's just, it's a temporary headache. It's blocking traffic, and it'll pass.
Yeah. Right. Whereas if there were, real direct action by people that challenged the way that the world actually operates, then we would have a lot more power. We had Marissa on the podcast a few weeks ago, and she has a line that I've thought about almost every day since I, heard the audio and I was editing the recording. And that's, people, Democrats or Republicans, whatever, say vote with your wallet, right? And so, if you don't like what this corporation is doing, then you should shop somewhere else. And she said, I want to vote with my wallet, but against fiat money, right? I want to choose a different monetary system. That's my protest. That's my direct action. That is me choosing a different system than the one that's been just kind of presented to me, and one that I don't agree with. And I really believe that. I think Bitcoin is this revolutionary tool, in my opinion. The most powerful tool of capitalism today is fiat money, because it can be generated at will. It really is generated from the top down, and it's permissioned, it's gate capped. If you already have a lot of money, you have more power. Hey, that sounds like proof of stake, sort of, right? If you don't have a lot of money, you don't really have that much power in terms of the way that you can influence the economy and politics and all kinds of different stuff. So, if we had a different system where wealth didn't equal power and control, where anybody can participate, it's sort of a worldwide anarchist proof of concept. My kind of hot take that I'm trying to slowly put out in the world is that, like, Bitcoin is much more socialist than it is capitalist. And I think a lot of people don't want to hear that. They think that it's capitalism and it's this chance to kind of restart capitalism. But capitalism is proof of stake. And every day, Bitcoiners are on, you can't be shitcoining. We shouldn't be using altcoins. They're just a big casino. Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of people went off, I'm so specific, but a lot of people went after Natalie Brunell for having that course, right? For doing the $850, learning Bitcoin course. She's just doing capitalism. Why are you mad at her for doing capitalism if you love capitalism so much?
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it because I think it goes against what people should be doing, perhaps. So, but it's really interesting that people recoil at socialism, right? And I think that's, with having, Ben DeWall was just on What Bitcoin Did and talking about libertarian socialism. And that was a lot of the comments I saw was like, oh, these things, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense if you understand what the term actually means, and that, like, it was co-opted by these groups that tried to use it for their own advantage and then tainted it for everybody for years to come. And you see that in a lot of anarchist writings at the time. They're like, this is, the Bolsheviks are the worst. They've taken this term that means this and they made it mean something different, and it's going to ruin it for a lot of people. And that's, I think, what's happened.
Yeah. You said a lot there to
I did.
unpack.
Sorry, I did. Yes.
But no, don't apologize. What do you make of that? And by that, I mean, you have people who say, well, it's not real socialism, but this is what it means. And how it's been implemented is not the real one. This isn't how communism was designed. This is not how capitalism is supposed to work. It's crony capitalism.
Right.
I try to think about, why is that? Why are we getting all these examples of this is what it's supposed to be on paper, and this is how it is actually being implemented?
Yeah.
Would you agree? What do you make of that?
Yeah. So I think the main thing is this, is like, if you look at the, I'm going, and Ben did the same thing. I'm going back to, what I'm doing a lot is I'm reading people from, like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon is a great example. He was the first person in major work to call himself an anarchist. And his philosophy is called mutualism, which is basically market anarchism. So a lot of, like communism, for example, is not a market system. It's a moneyless society. I don't expect to convince a lot of through communists that Bitcoin is a great idea. I just don't expect to do that. But if you think that markets have a place, if you think that Bitcoin could be even a transitional technology towards a different way of living by curtailing state and capitalist power and being able to redirect it and put it in the hands of people, that's the thing, right? Is like what socialism really means, the definition of socialism as I understand it, is it's administration of everything by everyone. Therefore, if you have a small group of people who say, we are going to administer everything for everyone, that isn't socialism. That's just statism again, right? So like the idea of state socialism is actually sort of oxymoronic, because you have this exclusive group that has power and they use it to advance their own ends, right? That's bad. I'll be the first one to say, like, if when you say, I think socialism is terrible, and you're talking about Leninism or Stalinism, I couldn't agree with you more. This is a terrible concept, right? You just instead of having capitalism where anybody can start a business, you made it so that no one can start a business except for this guy, right? That is inherently awful, and it leads to terrible conditions. Nobody can actually fight for better conditions because they're supposed to all be part of, they're already there, right? But they're not there. They don't have any power. And strong central government in that situation is antithetical to socialism, because it's supposed to be administration by all of the people. So there should be a lot more local administration, community administration of things. But this is the problem with having any kind of discussion, is you start off by saying, I think capitalism is bad. And they're like, well, you think trading things is bad? I'm like, no, I think that's a really good thing. That's not what I'm talking about, right? And so now we have to have the whole 2-hour discussion about what's the definition of capitalism,
Right.
What's the definition of this thing, and, of socialism, of whatever. But that's, it always kind of devolves into that, which is really unfortunate. I wish there was one agreed upon definition of something of capitalism or socialism, whatever, but that's not how it works. And so it ends up kind of devolving to that a lot. And it just takes people saying, you know what, I need to learn more about this. Just like we're trying to get people to learn more about Bitcoin, right? We're trying to convince people that it's a really good idea to spend time learning about this technology. And we can only tell them so much, right? Somebody telling you about it, even if you went and sat a 6-hour lecture about it, that's not even close to enough time to really understand what's going on with it, right? You have to actually go through the process yourself. And that is the self-empowerment part, right? Is it encourages people, I think, to do that, right? To take it upon themselves to do that, right? To not just have it dictated down to them, but to take it upon themselves to understand what's going on, just like you would have to do if you lived in a more directly democratic society, where your vote on something is really important because it's going to affect your life right now. And also the way that people in the Bitcoin space like are so cooperative and they help each other out. People all the time, they're like, how can I help? Or, direct me towards, I'll direct you towards resources. Some people will get on a call with you, like just to do it, just to help out, right? That's like solidarity, right? That's mutual aid. These are socialist sort of backbone principles when it comes down to it. So if everybody was a capitalist all the time and everything, somebody would say, can you help me out? And they'd be like, no, you can pay me money and I'll help you out, right? People don't do that. In fact, when somebody did do that, people pounced on her.
Right.
They were like, don't do that. You just get the information's there. Just direct people towards the information. It's just available. Yeah, that's great. That's mutual aid, right? You're just helping other people out to help them out, not because you're going to profit from it, right? Maybe you can think of it as the price will go up and therefore they'll profit. But the price goes up for everybody, right? It isn't just that they're profiting. Just like when people mine Bitcoin, right? They're not mining it just to protect themselves. They can think of it that way, but that's not functionally how it's actually working, right? They're actually securing the whole network for everyone. They're processing everyone's transactions, and they're rewarded by everyone for doing that. So I wish people weren't so afraid of the idea of what socialism actually is, because if it just means rules without rulers and administration by the people, isn't that what Bitcoin sort of is in the end? That's kind of why I'm really become drawn to it so much, is because I think it really actually is a proof of concept of that really working.
Blasphemy, Tom. Blasphemy.
I know, blasphemy.
All right, am I up?
Yes, you're up. Once again, another long-winded answer from me. Obviously, I'm more comfortable usually on the editing side of this, and because what happens is someone's like, what do you think about this? And I'm like, here's my entire life story about this. All right. So this is kind of a similar, line that we were just talking about. There may be multiple beliefs that learning about Bitcoin has challenged in you. What's the biggest or most consequential belief that you no longer hold or now hold, or has been most transformed by understanding and researching Bitcoin?
This is such a good one. And I think I've mentioned on other podcasts that earlier in my life, I think it was around 9/11, and you obviously saw a lot of discussions about religion, how it's influencing the world, a lot of disinformation about the Muslim faith, Nation of Islam.
Yeah.
And I wanted to better understand the world in that sense. All these, if this was going to be such a contentious issue, and clearly it has been historically for millennia, I should better understand that. And so I just read as much as I could about it, about the three primarily monotheistic faiths. And then the same thing applied later on in my life in understanding racism, and so forth. I wanted to understand the topics that seem to be driving a lot of the problems in society. And finally, that came to money. And it was coming back to Bitcoin after the ubiquitous crypto soiree, and trying to better understand Bitcoin. I told myself that I needed to better understand money. And what an incredibly fascinating thing to study.
Yeah.
I never took any economics or financing in college. And so it was a whole new world to better understand, but the historical context surrounding money is so fascinating, and would encourage everybody rather, to learn more about it, regardless of whether you find Bitcoin intriguing. But going through that process, and then going through the better understanding Bitcoin rabbit hole, and previously just solidified the fact that I have less certainty about any given complicated topic or complex issue, for that matter, than I did prior to Bitcoin. And there's humility that is a component of that. There is a reluctance to give up my righteousness and my ego that I had hung on to, because Bitcoin touches on so many different facets of study in life that you quickly recognize that how could you hang on to how did I hang on to belief systems that I felt to be so certain, so true previously? You know, if whatever, whatever the Democratic Party says, that must be it, and that must be good, and that will
Yeah.
have the intended effects that they said it would.
Right.
Blind faith like that, right?
Yeah.
But what Bitcoin does, again, is allow you to see that ultimately, in my opinion, comes down to this understanding of complexity and laws of unintended consequences. That I need to be honest with the fact that the world and the economy is incredibly complex. And righteousness does a disservice to the causes and values that I hold dear. That if I am to actually seek, let alone obtain the ends that I seek, dignity, relief of suffering, connection to loved ones, and more foundational things of food and shelter and health, I cannot hang on to prior ideologies that may have unintended consequences negatively to the very people that I am trying to help. And there's certainly a plethora of left-leaning laws and policies that have done those very things, right? So I needed to give that up in order to do the very things that I said that I wanted to. And it's not only the study of Bitcoin's, in the study of money and how Bitcoin works that gets you to that, but it's also how the protocol itself, Bitcoin, was designed, and the trade-offs of how it was designed, why Satoshi did certain things, why he chose proof of work over proof of stake, choices like that, and in almost putting them in columns and in better understanding, why did you do this? Well, it's because of this. These are the unintended consequences that would have happened had you chosen proof of stake, or had you made the block size bigger, had you X, Y, or Z. It's studying those trade-offs that became, I think, more eye-opening to me, because when you go to the ballot box, you don't think about that stuff. And it is never discussed in open debates that often, where, if we implement something, what are going to be the unintended consequences? You don't get that discussion. You rarely even get a discussion of how certain are we that it's going to obtain the ends that we want. And so I see Bitcoin much more transparent in that manner. Everything is the same information presented to the billionaires, presented to a person in poverty. The same rights granted to the billionaire through Bitcoin are granted to the person in poverty. To me, that is a very refreshing way to look at life in politics. And so the belief system that I no longer hold is a belief system of, I know what's right, and I'm going to a belief system that believes one segment of the population, a particular political party, knows what's right for my values. What I've come to understand, and someone has had a conversation with on DMs, was I feel pretty damn boring these days when it comes to my political identity. Tell me what the issue is, and then what hopes, goals we are trying to obtain from that issue. And then let's look at all the vast possibilities for how we get there, right?
Yeah.
While examining potential side effects, unintended consequences. And if that solution ends up being a free market, if that solution ends up being more of a small ground up grassroots initiative, if that ends up being more of a government funded project, if it's the best, and again, best does have a bit of a gray area, so be it. Label it what you want. If it gets the goals that we were after, that's what I'm for.
That's fantastic. I think that's, I've sort of, have had a similar kind of transformation in that way to a certain extent, where I think Bitcoin just does that, right? Where it sort of strips away some of these preconceptions about how things are supposed to work, how things have always worked, just like any revolutionary force does.
In addition to the fact that it's not how things have always worked.
Yeah.
Fiat money being off of the gold standard, like that's eye opening for many, many people. Like they just assume what has been has always been, and clearly when you recognize how many different iterations of monies we've been through the centuries, through the millennia, you're like, well, it's really kind of only natural that there's an evolution to this process, and we're living through that right now. So it's important to pay attention.
For sure. I think also, like, Bitcoin is kind of singularly, in terms of money, like you were saying, looking at the history of money and all of that, even on, a gold standard, if you will, like, it wasn't that there was this much gold in the treasury and then someone was like, "Nope, gotta stop." Right? Like, well, we just spend a little more, and then we'll spend a little more over here, and then these people, it's fine. We'll all work it out, right? Bitcoin, like, you actually can't do that, right? It's like programmatically keeps you from making that possible in terms of the actual base layer of the protocol. And so it's a much better accounting system. It's a much more secure system than, the gold standard ever was or ever could have hoped to be. And so I think in that way, it's like, it's, obviously it's a combination of technologies kind of put together into one sort of synthesis of things. That's also another, argument for synthesis is important, not just purely this, right? Purification is not necessarily as good as synthesis, right? Synthesis usually you get different strengths and weaknesses. You're able to work some of those weaknesses out and you come together and make something better than it ever could have been just individually. But I think that it takes it, the administration of money to a totally different place than it's ever been. And it makes it more accessible than it's ever been. And, there's so many positive things about it. And it just gets down to the root of things, right? It just shows you, what's possible and if you really want it to be.
Exactly. All right, Tom, your last question. Who is your dream guest for the podcast and why?
My dream guest overall, I would say, well, I mean, there's a lot of intelligent Bitcoiners out there. Just in this very moment right now, my dream guest would be Ben DeWall. He works with Swan, and he just was interviewed by Peter McCormack on what Bitcoin did, and his episode was called Bitcoin and Libertarian Socialism. And I would love to give Ben more of an opportunity to kind of explain exactly what that is so that people can understand it and really elucidate on how it, is really a powerful economic system, how that actually is how you achieve maximum freedom. Because I think that is the goal here is maximum freedom means that as many people as possible have the freedom to choose what's right for them in their life. So I think Ben DeWall would be great. Lola Leitz, who's in her Twitter bio, it says accidental crypto anarchist, which I really like.
Yeah, I'd like to have her on the show too.
Yeah, Lola's fantastic. She doesn't really take a lot of crap. She just kind of says it like it is. And she's also a very, libertarian minded person who wants, people to be free to make their own decisions. And, I think one of those two people would be an excellent guest here in the near future if we can talk to them and get that going.
All right, there you go. Open invitations, but I think I'll be reaching out.
Yes. All right. My last question for you. Do you think that we'll see Bitcoin on par with or overtaking the US dollar as a worldwide means of exchange in your lifetime?
Yes. And the reason is it's not going away, one. Two, I think you have to look at what's going on behind the scenes. People who aren't into Bitcoin only see the headlines, and that's more often than not just gloom and doom. But if you look at all the mining infrastructure that's going in, the hardware solutions that are going into it, it's really hard to imagine a world where it becomes this small niche market. And that's just the United States. I think of the top 20 countries for crypto, not just Bitcoin adoption, 15 of the 20 are not G20
Yeah.
nations, if I recall correctly. And so the mantle is already being picked up by these other countries, and I foresee that that will continue, especially in Africa. And so this thing, Bitcoin, is not going away. And I forget where it is in total market cap uh, for other currencies. I think it's at least top 10, 12, 13 at this point. And I know there's debate about whether or not that's relevant. But I think it is one of the relevant components to acknowledging whether or not it's going to head in that direction. And seeing that market cap move up higher and higher, yes, I do believe it will. And what I expect we'll see is ever increasing adoption in these smaller countries, kind of overtaking their dominant currency, and being used more as a medium of exchange there, in addition to store of value. But I think the medium of exchange component will be more important for more quote unquote underdeveloped countries. Whereas in the United States and the EU, I really think Bitcoin is going to be solidified more from the energy side, that it's going to be perhaps, maybe we'll see in the next few years an ETF, and it'll become a little bit more of a niche 1-2% in the majority of people's portfolios. But I think it really gets its claws into the G20, the other G20 countries, through the energy side of Bitcoin, and that is Bitcoin mining. And from there, it'll be ubiquitous within the next 20 years. So assuming I've got 50, hopefully, years left in my life, yes, I think it's definitely going to be a top 5 currency medium of exchange.
Yeah.
At the minimum. And does it ever replace fiat? I don't know. I think that's a much harder bet to place. But it makes me think of whether or not, one of the critiques that's put toward Bitcoin is based upon that assumption that all of a sudden it becomes the law of the land and everybody is using Bitcoin as store value medium and a medium of exchange, and therefore this deflationary currency has X, Y, and Z problems. First of all, I think that leap is really problematic because a whole hell of a lot can happen between now and then.
Yeah.
And it assumes a lot as well. But it also assumes that things couldn't change. And now we're going down a whole other rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But when people make that claim, to me, it says, well, we are choosing to then live in a world where this disinflationary currency is a bad thing, and we're just going to live with it. Whereas if we have consensus, something could potentially change. In hypothetically, I think that's an interesting scenario to play out. Do we get to a world where disinflationary currency is hurting more people than it is helping? And if so, is there something that we can do about it? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's fun to speculate on that. But yes, to answer your question, I certainly do think that it will be right up there. It's not going away.
Yeah, I like this question. I mean, I wrote the question, but I like it a lot because, and actually, if you don't mind, I have a couple of comments on this I think are important to this that I just wanted to add for everybody. I think, so there's something, I know it occurs in other ways of structuring as well, but in studying anarchism and libertarian socialism, a thing called prefiguration. In prefiguration, what you do is you're basically building something alongside of the current system so that when it comes time to topple or dissolve the current system, you have something right there ready to go.
That's a Jeff Booth. Well, he speaks to something very similar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really building dual power, right? You're building another kind of thing over here, and then you're just saying, hey, come do this, right? You're saying opt into this thing instead. And then as people realize that it's superior to the current system, they'll reject the current system and it'll actually weaken the system.
Right.
Over time, as people come into it, this new system will be able to replace the old system,
Right.
and you won't have a bunch of downtime or saying, we got rid of this, now what do we do?
Right.
Right? That's how it really goes wrong, is when you have somebody come in and say, we're just going to get rid of this thing with no plans, right? That
Right.
is
Right.
not
Right. Right.
good. So I think Bitcoin is prefiguring a world where, first off, like you just said, when we are, Jeff Booth actually says this as well, right? Stop trying to measure or recreate, a system within the system you're already in, right? You have to think outside of that system altogether to build a better system. Otherwise, you're just going to try to basically recreate parts of the system as it exists, and it will never.
Listen up, Democrats.
Exactly. And it will never really supersede the system as it was. You'll just recreate it in a different image, and it won't be the revolutionary thing you think it is.
Right.
And so Bitcoin is an opportunity to say this thing is already here, right? Like, we already have this other system. It's a chance to build. We're building it right now. It's being built, right? It's happening now. And so, looking down the road, and you say, okay, well, if it worked, if everything else worked the same way, then this really won't work. Well, okay, then everything else shouldn't work the same way, right? We have to change multiple things. And so I think that saying, fix the money, fix the world, I think is heavily flawed, and it doesn't take into account all kinds of different stuff. But at its core, I understand the sentiment of the problem is when everything is, everything is exchanged with money as the currency to do so, and things are built on the monetary system, and the financial system controls all this infrastructure and stuff. Like, yeah, if you fundamentally change the way money works, then you do change the way the world works. And this is an opportunity to do that. And it's not theoretical, right? It's happening as we're speaking right now. People are building on Bitcoin. People are, building off the Lightning Network and allowing people to exchange value instantly all the way across the world. So, it's happening now. And I think, it's a really powerful thing. And it's just about educating people and getting them to understand that we are building something better, and come and build it with us now,
That's your call to action.
Yeah.
Come and build it with us. Excellent. Well, Tom, we did it.
Yes.
That was a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I hope people enjoyed it. Any final thoughts?
No, just once again, just want to say thank you to all the listeners who have been with us for, the first 34 episodes of this show. And I hope you appreciate some of my ramblings today. Obviously, I've gotten very intent on trying to help people understand that we shouldn't be afraid of certain terms because they've been misdefined for us in the past. We should be open to rethinking the way that when we start to learn about Bitcoin, and we start to question some of the things that we've been taught our whole lives about how certain things work or have always worked when it isn't really true, like you were saying, Mark. Hopefully people can expand that to other things and say, well, maybe I don't fully understand this, or I should understand this better. And I would like to do that all the time. If there's something I don't understand, I want to understand it better so that I know exactly how it works. And that way, if it's something I don't think is the right thing, I know why it's not the right thing. And I don't just sort of think it's bad, right? Like, why don't I like it? Well, because it does this and this and this, and it functions like this. So in order to do something different, we have to do it like this, or we can do it like this, or this, or this. You come up with options, you understand what's going on with it. And, I'm better able to articulate my worldview and help other people maybe do the same. So, that's kind of where I'm at.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. Again, thank you so much for everybody who's listening. We greatly appreciate it. And with that, we will see you on our next episode. Thanks again for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Progressive Bitcoiner. If you enjoyed the show, head on over to Apple Podcasts and please leave a review. And don't forget, we have a website, theprogressivebitcoiner.com, where we have a lot of great content on Bitcoin and progressive issues. Thanks again for tuning in.